Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here in person at the Hamilton. And I know there's a significant number of people working from office and home, so good morning to you as well. So in terms of an agenda, we're just going to spend a couple of minutes talking a little bit about Gigamon. For those of you who don't know us, it'll be a good update and refresher for those who are familiar with Gigamon. We'll talk about the problem we solve and then put that into context of zero trust. And as Troy said, focusing on one of those central pillars, the network pillar. And we should have some time left over at the end for a question or two. There we go. So Gigamon has been in business for coming up on 20 years now, and we actually invented the traffic visibility space, giving visibility into data in motion as it traverses the physical network, the virtual environment, and of course, more recently, out into the cloud. We are the industry leader. We're installed in nearly every federal agency. I have a sampling up there. In terms of private sector customers, we have some household names, nearly 4,000 customers, but Bank of America, Walmart, Apple, Verizon would be some, of course, that you would be familiar with. In terms of broader public sector, the state of Virginia, or Commonwealth of Virginia, is a customer, so is the state of California, as well as several others. Local government, District of Columbia, would be a great example. And in the higher ed arena, locally, George Washington University and Virginia Tech are Gigamon customers, and other public entities as well, some of them very significant, like New York's Metropolitan Transportation Authority and the Port of Los Angeles. So in addition, one of the things about Gigamon is we help improve cybersecurity, but we're also a great economic decision. This has been validated by Forrester Research and by the ESG group. Very rapid payback. We're one of the few cybersecurity investments that has a very good chance of paying for itself in the same fiscal year that a CIO or a CISO makes that investment. I was asked over breakfast before proceedings started, how large is Gigamon? We're about 1,000 employees. In our public sector business, about 25% of the overall business. We enjoy good support from our customers. And from the analysts for Gartner peer reviews, we get a rating of about 4.7 out of 5, and many of those reviewers are federal customers. Customer sat is generally 4.8 out of 5, and about 92% of our business actually comes from existing customers. So they find value in Gigamon and reward us with repeat business as they find new use cases, including zero trust for Gigamon. These representative customers, all three branches of government, and that's mostly information technology scenarios, but also operational technology, including a pilot for a shipboard scenario. We have other OT use cases with Department of Energy and some of the federally owned utilities as well. And we work hard to invest in the security standards that are so important to the government that are listed here. So what problem does Gigamon solve? The traditional approach has been, as network volumes grow and more traffic is put online, to just throw more cybersecurity instrumentation at the problem. And what tends to happen is you get a chaotic, hard to manage scenario like we see here on the slide. And that's also very costly and inefficient. And it's prone to human error. A lot of network outages are caused by human error. And obviously, cybersecurity vulnerabilities can occur because of misset parameters and switches. So we thought we had a better way at Gigamon. And what we did is we introduced the industry's first network packet broker to give agencies and other enterprises pervasive visibility into their data in motion as it traverses physical, virtual, and in the cloud. We have a hardware chassis purpose-built to work very well in 100 gig and now 400 gig scenarios, those massive volumes. I'm going to point out 3 of our GigaSmart features, which give rapid payback for our customers in cybersecurity and network performance scenarios. One of them involves data reduction techniques using deduplication and flow mapping. The example there would be if one of these tools happened to be a FireEye Trellix instrument that was designed to stop malware from entering the enterprise through a malicious link or attachment, you would only want to send that FireEye device email traffic. You wouldn't want to send it voice over IP packets, video packets, or other web traffic. So you would allow it to do its special job very, very well. Another example would be decrypting TLS traffic. Many tools could not decrypt traffic at all, so it didn't even inspect it. But now, when they can decrypt SSL and TLS encrypted traffic, to turn that on, you take about a 50 to 80% performance hit on that tool. So with Gigamon, you can do it once on the next generation network packet broker and send it to many tools. And in some cases, that might be 20 or 30 tools. So you can see where you would get a rapid payback there. And then finally, metadata generation. We've got deep packet inspection, we've got full packet capture, but often we're doing analysis of net flow and IP fix. So rather than have that done on the router switch architecture, which is a low priority job for router switch architecture, and you might only get sampled net flow, have Gigamon do that, and we can do it with sampled or unsampled fidelity and pull that metadata generation off of the router switch architecture so it can do its job very well. So we act as a force multiplier. So what does that have to do with zero trust? Well, what we do, obviously, is help the network and all the instrumentation that's used to secure and monitor that network work at peak performance. And the network still matters. And you've heard that from a couple of the speakers. There's been a lot of focus on identity management, appropriately so, a lot of focus on endpoint detection and response. But we look at the network as the single best version of the truth. And what do I mean by that? Well, whether you're doing deep packet inspection, full packet capture, or metadata generation and analysis, if something happens on the network, there's going to be a record of that. So let's say an adversary penetrates the enterprise, starts to do command and control activity, some beaconing, maybe starts to move laterally, begins to stage data in preparation for theft, and then does exfiltration. There'll be indicators of that, and that'll come from network records. So in addition to the logs produced by an endpoint detection and response, you're going to want to complement that with network visibility as well, so that you can interrupt that attack as soon as possible. And as was referred to earlier, one of the ways that access is going to be granted is going to be on by what's happening on the network. In fact, in FCW Insider this morning, there was an article about how DISA is enhancing its two-factor, doing some pilots, enhancing its multi-factor authentication, beyond the CAC card, which has been, in practice for so many years. And they're going to look at up to 15 different attributes to consider whether or not access will be granted to data by a user or a device or service. And some of those attributes are going to be determined by observing what's happening on the network, whether that's physical, virtual, or out into the cloud. So it's important to know what's happening on the network and what's going on in the network pillar. My clicker's a little slow. We'll go with this. So one of the requirements is for agencies to plan and then implement segmentation and micro-segmentation. You heard Alan Hill, the previous speaker, talk about understanding data flows within your network. You need to understand data flows before you do your segmentation and micro-segmentation, because you don't want to disrupt network activities. You don't want to break the network when you're moving toward that segmented construct. And having visibility into the traffic and motion is essential for that. And then, of course, once you do get your microsegmentation implemented, you'll still want to be able to inspect the data that travels within that segment and between segments. Some additional benefits I already talked about, complementing what's done by an EDR, because endpoint detection and response systems can't monitor all endpoints. IoT and OT, SCADA systems are a good example where you just can't put an agent on those endpoint devices. Lateral movement detection's important. We're going to take a deeper look at the NSA US Cybercom DISA pilot that Randy Resnick referred to this morning, in the role that network visibility played in that and some of the real world lessons learned out of the Dreamport facility that Randy mentioned. And then log and record correlation is important. So SIMs are going to be part of any zero trust architecture. They do a great job, with the logs from an endpoint system, but you'll also want to correlate the metadata and flow records that you pick up from the network to see if there's any discrepancies between what your endpoint is seeing and what's being witnessed on the network. Why is that? Well, if you think about the Colonial pipeline hack, one of the first things the adversary did once they penetrated the network was they tuned down the logging on the EDR system. So the EDR system itself had been compromised. They didn't tune it down to the degree where it tripped an alert, but it made it more difficult for them to be detected. That's why their dwell time was so long before they launched their ransomware attack on the Colonial pipeline. So just as was mentioned earlier, you can't trust any one component or any one technology. You need to have defense in depth, and you need to be able to validate against various records that you have in your system. Okay, this is DISA's 5-pillar model. We saw the 7-pillar model from DoD, but they're, as Randy Resnick said, philosophically consistent. We've talked quite a bit about identity. I'll mention on the device pillar before we dive deeper into the network and look at that pilot at Dreamport, that Gigamon has played a role in the CDM program, that's DHS's Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation Program, for about 7 years. And that was largely about identifying devices on the network. So what's on your network? So in that sense, we've been a part of Zero Trust for about 7 years. And the various guidance and tasking documents definitely talk about leveraging the investment that agencies have already made in products like Gigamon through the CDM program. So we already talked about the need to segment networks and how important it is to avoid breaking the network as you go to segmentation and micro-segmentation. So you're going to have to monitor, as I mentioned earlier, what's going on in the new segments. Visibility remains critical, and also what's happening between the segments. Thank you. And something else the guidance documents make clear is that as segmentation increases, the need to decrypt and the value of decrypting so you can inspect all traffic may wane a little bit. And because agencies never will have enough budget to do everything they want, there's going to have a risk-based approach. So some decisions are going to have to be made as to what degree do we decrypt and inspect all traffic. So in some cases, there'll be full packet capture, deep packet inspection. In other cases, you'll want to use that metadata generation, even with encrypted traffic, to get an indication that there might be a compromise, and then make a decision as to whether or not you want to do more intensified inspection. And visibility into what's going on in the network through a visibility fabric powered by next generation packet broker will be critical to that. So ultimately, what you want to have is no blind spots. Because, of course, any blind spot represents a vulnerability, and the basic premise is you can't defend what you can't see. So Randy Resnick from the Pentagon talked about the Zero Trust pilot. And there's been a pilot going on, as he mentioned, at an accelerator facility in Columbia, Maryland, called Dreamport. And Gigamon's been involved in that. But they've learned some lessons. And this is a quote from David Jones, who's the chief zero trust architect there, including for cloud. And what he said was, hey, when we did our red teaming, we just did not see some of the things that we should have seen. So they lacked visibility, physical, virtual, and into the cloud. And because of that, they were not seeing that lateral movement that you want to detect and interrupt early before catastrophic, damage, destruction of data, altering of data, or theft of data takes place. After introducing Gigamon to that situation, the results improved dramatically. And again, this is a quote from Randy Jones. And if we can put into the chat room a link to the case study that's published. And this is a case study that was vetted and approved by the National Security Agency about the pilot that Randy referred to this morning. And if we can have that in the chat room for the remote employees. And there's hard copies in the back of the room for those remote participants, hard copy in the back of the room for those who are here in the room today with us. So let's take a deeper look at that joint pilot, a fairly typical network environment with standard cybersecurity tools, next generation firewall, a NAC, an IDS, and a SIM. Virtualized environment as well. The first phase did not include the cloud, other than what some people will call private cloud in the VMware environment. So there were some lessons learned about blind spots in this environment. And the red teaming that Randy Resnick actually headed up really had a pretty easy time penetrating the network and then moving laterally and getting access to resources that they should not have been able to get access. One of the big findings was that there simply was not enough visibility into east-west traffic, and that the span ports that were being used to pull traffic from the router switch architecture to the cybersecurity tools just wasn't providing the right kind of fidelity. So the team reassessed, set some additional goals, and then moved to a new phase of the pilot. They brought in a next generation packet broker. It happened to be ours, represented by the orange box there. Use some of those smart software, data reduction techniques, decryption techniques, and metadata generation techniques that I talked about earlier. They also used taps to tap both the physical and virtual environment. And the results were quite a bit different. Whereas before, what they were having was poor cybersecurity and pretty high costs because the SIM was a metered billing paradigm where the more information they sent to the SIM, the more it would cost. So they filtered that down using Gigamon so that they can control their costs. So what they found is they got better cybersecurity and controlled their costs. On the physical as well as the virtual network. The next phase is to move that visibility out into the cloud. And the team there is looking to publish their results next quarter, so sometime after July 1st. And that Randy alluded to that in his presentation this morning, and how that the lessons learned in this pilot have informed some of the plans that they're going to have DoD-wide. So we've been talking mostly about the network pillar, but having pervasive visibility into the data in motion has other benefits as well. We talked about operational technology, but also for bring your own devices and other infrastructure components and legacy components. Supply chain attacks, have been in the news with SolarWinds. Having visibility can as to what's going on in the network can help there as well. And I talked about being able to compare logs and do correlation as another benefit. So a couple of the speakers have talked about moving to a zero trust architecture being a multi-year and maybe even a multi-tech refresh cycle. So earlier this week, there was a conference, and one of the big questions a lot of the speakers asked was, what's the best use of an IT dollar to make the most progress toward implementing a zero trust architecture? And this is a quote that came out on Monday, or actually it was just yesterday morning, from one of the CISOs from Department of Homeland Security. And what I would suggest is that focusing on the network pillar next, because it does allow you to get that pervasive visibility and help out in so many areas to help secure information technology and operational technology systems, is a great place to consider making that investment. A next generation network packet broker could be a force multiplier because it helps you get so much more productivity out of the instrumentations that an agency is already invested in through CDM and their own budget dollars. So learn the lesson that was learned at Dreamport by Randy Resnick and his team, and have that next generation network packet broker as part of your zero trust architecture from the beginning, from the ground up, as he said. And we believe we have the best, we are the market leader, and that we're one of the rare cybersecurity investments that allow you to improve your cybersecurity posture and pay for itself very rapidly. So it's a great way to improve readiness and be a good steward of the taxpayers' money. So with that, I will open it up to questions.
Dennis, thank you. I'm going to just sort of share the podium here with you if we can. So realize that with the mics and the lights, we all see to sort of stay in the same space. And a few questions I want to get to. I'm going to ask that we sort of go as high speed as we can on these. You were talking about the Dreamport example, and a question that came from the audience was a more focused one of a bigger picture question that I had, which is, the network has changed dramatically over the last few years as agencies move to hybrid cloud, as the workers are connecting from any number of different locations. Can you talk about how that hybrid cloud model impacts the monitoring challenges and the architecture that you need to put in place?
Yeah, sure, Troy. And I'll even extend it from hybrid cloud to hybrid cloud and multi-cloud. And we do have a case study about how we've helped Lockheed Martin go from monitoring on-premise and virtual environment to monitoring on-premise, virtual, and the cloud. And if we could put that into the chat window, that'd be helpful. And again, there's hard copies in the back. But what we're hearing from our customers, just as Alan mentioned in the previous presentation, you never want to be beholden to just one vendor. And that's true for cloud as well. So the cloud service providers are probably going to do a pretty good job helping you with a zero trust implementation for their instantiation of the cloud. But when you start to go hybrid cloud and then multi-cloud, who's going to help you with that? Google's probably not going to help you much with AWS, and Microsoft's probably not going to help you much with Oracle. Our approach is to be able to give you the visibility you need to into private cloud, hybrid cloud, and public cloud, so that you don't miss anything that's happening in your environment. Because with the shared responsibility model, while the service provider is responsible for security of the cloud, the agency, the CIO, the CISO, and the agency head remains responsible for the public's data that is in that cloud and the applications that are in the cloud. So having a hybrid and a multi-cloud strategy like we do at Gigamon is very important.
Thank you. And then we are going to talk with OMB about 2209 in more depth later today. But you mentioned it, and I'm curious if there are any of the new roadmap or milestones that are part of the revised implementation plan requirements of that memo that you think require sort of extra attention or a foot stomp from the Gigamon perspective.
Well, we talked about microsegmentation, and that's a challenging effort. And Alan mentioned this in the previous address, that you really need to be able to understand the data flows that you currently have very, very well before you embark on segmenting and microsegmenting your network. Because you don't want an outage. You don't want to break the network, because you have to have a continuity of your operation as you're transitioning to a more complete zero trust architecture. So being very thoughtful and purposeful about planning that microsegmentation effort, and then monitoring what happens within the segments and between the segments, which speaks to lateral movement, it is very important as well. And Gigamon and next generation network packet brokers give you the visibility to do that.
Very good. And I think we are going to have to leave it there. But Dennis Reilly, thank you very much for a great presentation. Really appreciate it.